At my daughter's 8th birthday party, my mother in law grabbed her by the arm in front of 20 children and said, "You don't belong in this family. You never did." Then she turned to me and told me to pack our things and be out of the house by morning. What she didn't know was that I had spent the last 4 months making sure that moment would never have any power over us again. And 2 days later, she was the one who had nowhere to go. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Lily Hargrove. I'm 31 years old. I married my husband Scott when I was 26, and for the first year, I thought I had found everything I ever wanted: a good man, a warm home, a family to belong to. I grew up in a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio, just me and my mom after my dad left when I was 9. We didn't have much. My mom worked 2 jobs, and I learned early that you work for what you have and you don't ask people for things they haven't offered. So when Scott introduced me to his family, I came in quietly, respectfully. I didn't ask questions about their money or their house or why they looked at me like I was something that had wandered in from outside. Scott's family had money, not the kind that makes people generous, the kind that makes people careful. His father had built a regional construction and property management company over 30 years in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. The company was worth several million by the time Scott and I met. His mother didn't work, had never worked, and spent most of her time organizing charity luncheons and reminding everyone around her of what she came from. His older brother, Carter, worked in the company and had already been told most of it would go to him one day. Scott worked there too, in the finance division, managing accounts and contracts. He was good at it. But in his family, good at something was never enough if someone else was better at being the oldest. When I got pregnant 8 months into our marriage, Scott was happy. Genuinely, quietly happy in the way he always was about things that mattered to him. He called me from work just to say he was smiling all day and couldn't stop. His mother called that evening to ask if we were sure about the timing. We were sure. Our daughter, Ivy, was born in the spring. She had Scott's dark hair and my stubborn chin, and from the moment I held her, I understood every cliche that had ever been written about loving your child. She was funny and dramatic and absolutely certain about everything she wanted at every moment. She was the best thing in my life. She still is. His family tolerate her the way you tolerate weather you didn't ask for. They came to holidays. His mother bought expensive gifts that were not age appropriate and didn't seem chosen with any knowledge of who Ivy actually was. His father shook her hand once when she was 4, like she was a business associate. Carter and his wife had 2 boys, and at family gatherings, those boys were the center of everything. While Ivy sat at the edge of the room and watched and eventually stopped wanting to go. I noticed all of it. I stored all of it. I told Scott gently at first, then less gently over the years. He heard me, he tried. But when you grow up inside something, you don't always know how abnormal it looks from the outside. The problems got worse when Scott started talking about leaving the company. He had been there for 6 years. He was good at his job, but he had always wanted to do something independently. He had an idea for a property technology startup, something that would streamline commercial lease management for small business landlords. He had spent 2 years developing it quietly, nights and weekends, sometimes on his lunch break. He showed me the business plan one evening at the kitchen table, and I read every page. It was good. It was genuinely, carefully good. I told him that. His father told him it was foolish. His mother told him he was being ungrateful. Carter told him he'd fail and come crawling back and that the company would probably let him return, but he shouldn't expect any favors. Scott left anyway. He launched his startup 18 months before Ivy's 8th birthday. I went back to work full-time in healthcare administration to cover our stability while he built it. We had savings, we had a plan, we were not reckless. But to his family, we were stupid and ungrateful and probably going to end up asking them for help. We did not ask them for help. And then something started happening that Scott's family did not expect. The startup started working. Within 9 months, he had his first real clients. Within a year, he had 12. He brought on 2 employees. The revenue was real. He was negotiating a contract with a mid-sized property management group out of Raleigh that would have been the biggest deal of his early company's life. He was proud in a quiet, disbelieving way. The way people get proud when they did the thing everyone told them not to do. His mother called during that period to ask if we needed money. We said no, thank you. She called again 2 weeks later to tell Scott that Carter had been promoted and that the company was doing very well without him. He said that was great news. I sat across the dinner table that night and watched my husband hang up the phone and stare at nothing for a moment, and then reach over and squeeze my hand. I squeezed back. We didn't need to say anything. Ivy's 8th birthday fell on a Saturday in April. She had asked for a rainbow cake, a magician, and a bouncy castle, and I had delivered all three because she is my daughter and she asked for things she cared about, and I had the ability to give them to her. We had it at our house, which was a 3 bedroom home we had bought in a suburb outside Charlotte the year before. Our house. Our names on the deed, I want to be clear about that. Scott's parents were invited because Scott wanted them there. I want to be clear about that too. I did not want them there. But he was still trying with them. He had not given up the way I had. I respected that about him even when it exhausted me. His mother showed up with Carter and his wife and their 2 boys and a present that was clearly a gift card in a bag that she hadn't bothered to wrap further. She walked into our home and looked around with the expression she always wore in our house, the one that said she was calculating everything she saw and finding it insufficient. The party was loud and happy, and Ivy was in her element, running around in a sparkly dress with frosting already on her face before the cake was even cut. The magician did a card trick that made all the kids scream. The bouncy castle was a hit. For about an hour, everything was fine. Then the magician did a trick where he picked a child to help him. He picked Ivy. Of course he did. It was her birthday, and she was right up front, and her hand had been up the entire time. She went up beaming and stood next to him and held out her little hand, and he made a coin appear from behind her ear, and she laughed so hard she snorted, and every parent in that yard smiled, except Scott's mother. I saw her face from across the yard. That closed look, that particular tightness around the mouth, I didn't know what had triggered it. I didn't have time to understand it before it happened. After the trick, Ivy ran back through the crowd toward the snack table, and she bumped directly into her grandmother. Hard enough that the woman stepped back. It was an accident. It was obviously an accident. Ivy was 8 and running and excited, and it was her birthday. His mother grabbed her by the upper arm. I was moving before I fully understood I was moving. "You need to calm down," his mother said, loud enough for people to hear. "You have been showing off this entire time and it is not attractive." Ivy went completely still. That stillness. The one that breaks my heart to remember. She looked up at her grandmother and her face did the thing children's faces do when they are trying very hard not to cry in front of people. "You are just like your mother," his mother continued, and her voice had dropped but not enough. "Neither of you understands how to behave around people of a certain standard. You don't belong in this family. You never did." I got to them at the same time as Scott. He stepped between his mother and Ivy, and I pulled my daughter into my arms. She was shaking, her face pressed into my shoulder, and I could feel her trying to hold herself together the way kids do when they're humiliated somewhere they thought they were safe. "Mom," Scott said, and his voice was something I had never heard from him before. Flat, final. "That's enough." "I was just telling her. I heard what you said." The yard had gone quiet, 20 children and their parents. The magician had stopped. Everyone was looking. His mother straightened. "She needs to be corrected. That child has no discipline, and it comes from our mother, and I have held my tongue long enough." "Then you can leave," Scott said. She looked at him like he had said something in a language she didn't speak. "You can leave our house," he said again. Same voice. "Right now." Carter stepped forward. "Scott, let's not." "Carter, I'm not talking to you." His father came in from wherever he had been standing and put a hand on Scott's shoulder and said in his low, controlled way, "Let's all calm down. We'll go inside and talk about this." I don't know what I was planning to do. I know what I was feeling. I was holding my daughter on her birthday in our yard while 24 people watched, and the woman who had just told her she didn't belong was being handled by men who thought a conversation inside would fix it. I looked at Scott. He looked at me. And without a word, I knew what he was asking, and I gave him a small nod, and he turned back to his family. There's nothing to talk about, Scott said. I need you to go. His mother's expression changed then. Something underneath the composure came to the surface. You are throwing away your family for this woman and her. Say one more word about my wife or my daughter, Scott said quietly, and I will make sure every branch of this family knows exactly what you said to an 8-year-old at her birthday party in front of her friends. Silence. Get your things, he said. I'll walk you out. They left. His mother walked out with her chin up and her eyes forward, and Carter followed with his wife and his boys, and his father was last. And he paused at the door and looked back at Scott, and something passed between them that I couldn't fully read. Then he left too. The party recovered the way parties do when adults decide to let children lead. The magician made a show of something involving a disappearing handkerchief, and the kids laughed. And the moment passed, and Ivy had cake and opened presents and fell asleep in the car on the way home with a balloon tied to her wrist. But I held her for a long time that night after Scott put her to bed. Just held her in the dark and felt her breathing slow into sleep and thought about every year before this and every year ahead, and what it meant that the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally had chosen, again and again, not to. I had started doing something 3 months before that party. I want to be honest about that. I had not done it because of what happened at the party. I had started because of something that happened in January, something quieter, but just as terrifying. In January, Scott's father had called and asked to meet with us. We went to their house for dinner, which we did rarely. During the meal, his father had said, carefully and in the language of reasonable men, that he was concerned about Scott's company, that he had heard things, that the Raleigh contract might not close, that perhaps Scott should consider returning to the family company, that there was a role available, and that if he returned there would be certain benefits, including an arrangement concerning the family property that would make our housing situation more secure, the family property, their house, a home Scott had grown up in, and that his father had always suggested, loosely, might someday be something the family shared. Scott said he would think about it. After dinner in the car, I asked him what he wanted to do. He said he didn't want to go back, but he was scared. The Raleigh contract was uncertain, and 3 employees depended on him, and we had a mortgage. I told him the Raleigh contract wasn't the only thing in the pipeline. I told him I had been talking to my own contacts in healthcare administration about a potential partnership that could use his software on the medical office property management side. I had not told him yet because I didn't want to raise his hopes. But I was telling him now. He looked at me for a long time. You've been working on this, he said. For about 6 weeks, I said. I didn't want to say anything until I knew it was real. He was quiet. Then he said, how real is it? Real enough that I called a lawyer last month to make sure we understood our options, I said. Not just for the business, for everything. He understood what I meant. We had talked before, in the way couples talk about difficult things obliquely, about what would happen if his family ever decided to use their resources against us. His father had lawyers on retainer. His brother had been known to be litigious. I had started thinking carefully with legal guidance about how our assets were structured, our home, the business, Ivy's future. Over the next 3 months, Scott and I had done several things quietly and carefully. We refinanced our home in a way that gave us significant liquid protection. Scott had restructured certain elements of his business ownership with legal guidance. We had opened a dedicated trust account for Ivy's benefit, funded partially by the business, that was legally insulated from any outside claim. We had also, on the advice of our attorney, put in writing a formal financial separation between ourselves and Scott's family, which documented that we had received no gifts, loans, or financial support from them in over 3 years. This was true, but having it documented mattered, and Scott, who had been thinking more clearly than anyone knew, had in February gone to his attorney and updated his will. Not dramatically, practically. In the event of something happening to him, everything went to me as trustee for Ivy. The business, the home equity, everything. His family had no claim. There was nothing to contest. He told me about it on a Tuesday night after Ivy was asleep. He showed me the documents at the kitchen table the same way he had shown me his business plan years earlier. He said, I should have done this a long time ago. I'm sorry it took me this long. I told him not to apologize. I told him I had been doing my part too and that we were doing it together. He reached across the table and took my hand. After the birthday party, after Ivy was asleep and the house was quiet, I sat with Scott in the kitchen and we talked for a long time. Not about what his mother had said, about what came next. He had decided, I think, before the party. What happened at the party just removed any remaining uncertainty. He called his father the next morning and said that he would not be returning to the company and was not interested in any arrangement concerning the family property. He said that he and his family needed distance. He said this clearly and without cruelty, and his father listened without interrupting, which I had not expected. His mother called an hour later. I did not hear the conversation. Scott took it in the backyard and came in 20 minutes later and sat down and said, "She said, if we want to do it this way, then don't expect anything when they're gone." "Okay," I said. "I told her that was fine," he said. "Okay," I said again. He looked at me. "Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay," I said honestly. What Scott's family did not know, and what I had not yet told them, was that the Raleigh contract had closed 3 weeks earlier. Scott had said nothing publicly. His family had been waiting for evidence of his failure, and he had given them silence instead. The medical office partnership I had been quietly cultivating had also materialized into a signed letter of intent that would add a significant revenue stream to his company. We were not struggling. We were not crawling back. We were building something that had nothing to do with them. 2 days after the birthday party, our attorney sent a formal letter to Scott's father. It outlined several things. It documented that Scott was the legal owner of his company with no family financial interest. It clarified the ownership structure of our home. It put on record that we had not received financial support from his family in over 3 years, and that no expectation of inheritance had ever been formalized or contractually established. It was not aggressive, it was not threatening. It was simply a statement of fact that left no room for ambiguity about where the lines were. His father's attorney called our attorney the same day. His father called Scott that evening. I was in the kitchen making dinner, and I could hear Scott's voice in the other room, calm and even. Ivy was at the table doing homework, occasionally asking me how to spell things. I moved around the kitchen and felt something I had not felt in years. Something like the absence of a weight I had been carrying so long I had stopped noticing it. His father's voice was different on the phone. Scott told me afterward, not arrogant, careful. He asked about the business. He said he hadn't realized how far along it had come. He said that his mother had been under a lot of stress and that what she said to Ivy was not what the family intended. Scott said he understood. His father asked if there was any possibility of repairing the relationship. Scott said that was something he would need to think about, and that if and when he was ready to have that conversation, he would initiate it. But that the precondition for any relationship going forward was a direct, private, sincere apology from his mother to Ivy, not to him, not to me, to Ivy. Delivered in person, without caveats or conditions. His father said he would talk to her. Scott said, "Take your time." 3 weeks passed, then 5. No apology came, and after 2 months, Scott called his father one final time and said simply that he wanted to wish him well, that he hoped his parents had good health, but that given the absence of any acknowledgement of what had happened, he was closing that chapter. He was not angry. He was not wounded. He was finished. His father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She's not going to apologize, Scott." "I know," Scott said. "That's what I thought." "You're really going to do this?" "I already have," Scott said. He hung up and came to find me and Ivy in the backyard where we were planting tomatoes because Ivy had decided she wanted a garden and I had decided we were doing it. He crouched down next to her in the dirt and she handed him a small trowel and he started digging without asking what to do, and she told him very specifically that he was doing it wrong and he laughed and did it again the way she said. I watched them for a minute. The afternoon light was long and warm. The yard was ours, this little piece of earth with the fence Scott had painted last summer, and the corner where Ivy had once buried a toy she decided needed a funeral, and the tomato plants that were going to be unruly and probably delicious. I thought about all the years I had spent being careful around people who had never once been careful with us, all the dinners I had prepared myself for, all the comments I had quietly swallowed, all the times Ivy had sat at the edge of rooms that should have welcomed her. It was over. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a confrontation or anyone begging. Just over the way a door closes when you stop pushing it open. That evening, after Ivy was in bed, Scott opened a bottle of wine we had been saving for something we hadn't yet named and poured two glasses and sat across from me at the kitchen table. Do you think we made the right call? He asked. I thought about Ivy's face in my shoulder at the party. I thought about the way she had asked me that night before she fell asleep why Grandma didn't like her, and how I had told her that some people have trouble loving well and that it was never a reflection of the person they couldn't love. I thought about how she had looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "But you love me, right?" Not even a question, just a statement she needed to hear confirmed. Yes, I said, we made the right call. Scott nodded slowly. He looked at the table for a moment and then back at me. I'm sorry it took me as long as it did, he said. You got there, I said. That's the part that matters. We sat there for a while longer without talking, and the house was quiet and full of the particular piece of a life that belongs entirely to the people living it. The Raleigh contract came through in full 6 months later. Scott hired two more employees. The medical office partnership became a multi-year deal. His company was valued at a figure that would have made his family's early skepticism absurd if they had known about it, which they didn't, because we had stopped explaining ourselves to people who had never been on our side. Ivy grew her tomatoes. They were unruly. They were delicious. And every night when I tucked her in and she looked at me with those certain steady eyes, I thought about what it meant to protect something worth protecting. Not with drama or confrontation or revenge, with paperwork and patience and the quiet refusal to let anyone who had never loved you correctly decide what you were worth. They said she didn't belong. They never knew she already had everything she needed. I still think about that moment in the backyard. Not the ugly part. Not my mother in law's hand on Ivy's arm or the words that followed. I think about the moment after. The way Ivy pressed her face into my shoulder and held completely still. Like if she didn't move, none of it would be real. She was 8 years old and she was trying to protect herself from something she didn't have the words for yet. That image is the one that stayed with me. And in a strange way, it's the one I'm most grateful for, because it's the moment I understood, completely and without any remaining doubt, what I had been building toward and why it mattered. People talk about standing up for themselves like it's a single dramatic moment, a speech, a confrontation, someone begging. But what I learned through all of this is that the real work happens long before anyone is watching. It happens at a kitchen table at 11 at night, looking at documents no one will ever applaud you for reading. It happens in a lawyer's office, asking quiet questions about trust accounts and asset structures. It happens in 6 weeks of phone calls you don't tell your husband about yet, because you don't want to raise his hopes before you're sure. The protection I was able to give my daughter wasn't born in that backyard. It was built slowly, carefully, out of something I can only describe as refusal. Refusal to be caught unprepared by people who had always assumed we would be. Scott had that same quality, even if it took him longer to act on it. He knew what his family was. He had grown up inside it. But knowing something and being willing to let it go are two entirely different things. And I watched him grieve the family he had wanted them to be, even as he did what needed to be done. There is a kind of moral clarity that only comes when the person you love most is the one being hurt. He found his that afternoon and he never looked back. I respected him more in those 10 minutes than in any moment before or since. Ivy asked me that night why Grandma didn't like her. I told her the truth in the softest way I knew how. That some people have trouble loving well and that it was never a reflection of the person they couldn't love. She looked at me with those serious eyes she has always had and said, "But you love me right." Not even a question. She already knew the answer, she just needed to hear it said out loud. That is what children need most. Not wealth, not perfect circumstances, not families that perform warmth for an audience. They need someone who shows up completely, who does the invisible work before the crisis arrives, who builds the walls while everything is still calm, so that when the storm comes, there is somewhere safe to stand. What happened to us was not luck and it was not fate. It was the result of two people who chose over and over to think clearly instead of reacting emotionally, to act with integrity even when no one would know, and to keep going when the easier thing would have been to let fear make the decision. The people who tried to diminish us were counting on us to be too tired or too afraid or too grateful for scraps to push back. They miscalculated. And the consequences of that miscalculation were entirely of their own making. I planted tomatoes with my daughter this spring after all of it was over. They were unruly and wonderful. She was so proud of every single one. I thought about how much of what matters in a life looks exactly like that: small, imperfect, tended quietly, grown from something you almost gave up on. They said she didn't belong, she was already home.